Well, so I'm Ron Price, and this is my brother, Rodger Price. And this is actually the second time that we're attempting to have this conversation. The first time our internet didn't cooperate with us completely, but we wanted to get together and talk about Rodger's book. And we'll get into that in just a moment. First, I'll say we've had a great life together. We were both born at a young age. And we really had a great, at least in my opinion, I'm the older one, but we had a great childhood growing up together. Got into a little bit of trouble and had a lot of fun, but then our lives kind of went a different direction for many years. And then we found ourselves back connected with each other again in a deeper way. That's a little bit of the topic of our discussion today. It's around Rodger's book, which is called Faith and Physics Uncovered. Subtitle, The Compelling Relationship Between Timeless Faith and Modern Physics. So we're really here to talk a little bit about this book. Rodger, first of all, thanks for agreeing to talk with me on tape. You never know how this might be used for or against you in the future. But tell me a little bit about the genesis of this book. What got you to the point where this was something that was an important expression of who you are?
Well, before I do that, I want to say thank you for your willingness to talk on tape so that maybe this could help spread the word about this book. But the genesis of it is, we both grew up in the church, and you had an experience when you were 17 that flipped a switch in you, and you became, I guess, what we would call, back then, I think we would call you a Jesus freak, yeah. But also a born again Christian. And I was 14-ish at the time. And I didn't know I was going to become an engineer, or that I was so science minded, or proof, requiring proof for things. But I looked at that and went, what just happened? And you were a great actor. You were into acting at the time. And honestly, part of me is going, is this an act? Is this going to last? And you've only become more and more devout as a follower of Jesus ever since. And so that's just been so cool to watch. I had, partly because of your experience and hearing from you, I started to read some of the New Testament. Probably by the time I was 17, 18, 19 in there, I probably had read through all or most of the New Testament anyway. And there were passages that go, I believe this. But then there might be a passage a little bit later that seemed like the opposite thing. And at least to me, it's like, well, that's kind of crazy. And so the more I want to say kind of studied, because it's not like I got real serious about it, but the more I read it, the more I was pulled toward it, but at the same time thought, this is crazy. There's crazy stuff in the Bible. And so I continued on with wondering and looking, but very much knew that science was real and science was right. And, there's faith, which I don't know, but there's science. I mean, you can go prove this stuff in a laboratory. And so I become an engineer, and I have a really good friend who at the time was at best an agnostic, maybe an atheist. And we would talk about different books. And he said, we should read In Search of Schrodinger's Cat, a book named that. And I thought, okay, I'll read it. And I started reading it. And I thought, what has Philip put me onto? This stuff is crazy. This is not science. This isn't real. In fact, this feels more like some of the craziness I read in the Bible. And so that began a journey of understanding more about astrophysics, which I had taken a little bit in college, but I wasn't paying that close of attention. You just try to pass the exam and get to the next thing. I hadn't taken anything about quantum physics, which is the super tiny, astro being the huge, quantum being the super tiny. I had not really read about that. And I thought, the guy that wrote this is crazy. This is new age, weird stuff. And so then I'm going to read another book, and I'm going to read what Einstein had to say. And I'm going to read what the current Einsteins of the day have to say. And it's not like I was smart enough to really understand what they're saying, but I dove into probably another 5 books and came out of it over a year, maybe a year or 2 or 3. It's like, no, this stuff is crazy, but it's real. It's what science is telling us. And then the Holy Spirit was doing things in me where it's like, this is what the Bible is saying too, in a different way. It's kind of, or at least might not be saying the exact same thing, but they dovetail together. And so that, plus some other things going on that the Holy Spirit was doing, that I started reading that probably when I was about 34, 35. And then at the age of 39, came to a place where I just said, I believe, Christ, you're real. And I'm going to base my life as best I can. And I bet I'm going to fail miserably from time to time, like so many of my Christian friends do. But so I made a decision. It's like, this is what I believe, and I'm going to live by following Jesus as best as I can. And it's a journey, and I feel like I'm getting better, but still a ways to go as far as sanctification process. But I do believe Jesus is real, more real than science. And
interesting. Yeah, and we'll get back to what you described as two different choices that you had that you could make. But before we go there, part of what inspired me in your story was that I heard you speak to a group of either pastors or ministry leaders and share about astrophysics and quantum physics. And part of what was fascinating to me, because I don't come from the same kind of a educational background as you do, is you were saying that when you look out into the universe, astrophysics, that you actually find a whole lot of nothing. And when you look into the quantum world, the tiny part that you're talking about, you also find a whole lot of nothing. So can you explain that to us?
Sure.
And why is that significant?
Yeah. So in what we would call Newtonian world, Newtonian physics, which is named after Newton, and classical physics. So this is the world we touch and feel. It feels like there's all kinds of stuff. There's not much nothingness in our world. But when you look at the building blocks that make that, these atoms are at best, according to scientists, physicists, at best, they're 99.9999% nothing. There's nothing there. Other than there's energy fields, but there's not a thing. It's sort of like a magnetic field between two magnets. You see magnets or a magnet, and there's a field, but that's not a thing, so to speak. I mean, it sort of is, but sort of isn't. So there are these fields, but there's no matter. And string theory, which is one of the theories trying to explain everything right now, is a theory that says there is no such thing as matter. There's just these energy forces and these energy fields, and they show up with a structure that makes it look like matter, so that when I can hit my hand against another, it's like there's no physical thing hitting another. There's energy fields hitting another. And so now let me go to the the huge. So our galaxy, called the Milky Way galaxy, and there's billions of galaxies out there. Ours is just one of them. But
wait a minute. You said billions of galaxies?
Yeah, wow. Actually, the latest estimation is 2 trillion galaxies. And this is where it's like, how can all this be true, first of all? And secondly, how could someone have created this? But thirdly, it's like, how could it had just happened? So anyway, I don't know, other than I believe there's an incredible creator that has created all kinds of things we probably don't even know about. But we believe we can see 2 trillion galaxies. And in our galaxy, which is a pretty normal galaxy, there's about 400 billion stars. And the next closest star to us, which I think it's called Alpha Centauri, is quite a ways away. And if we shrunk down our Milky Way galaxy to where our star, keep shrinking it down, just in for a map or something like that, until our galaxy became the size of a light bulb, the next star would be 300 miles away. So the next light bulb would be 300 miles away. So in between, there'd be basically nothing. I mean, Earth would be in between, but in that scale, we wouldn't show up as anything. And so the density of the universe, the density of our galaxies is 99.9999% nothing. So the atoms that make up the stars are empty space. And then when you get to the huge, it's empty space. It's only in our kind of temporal experience that it feels like, oh no, the earth is full of all kinds of stuff. And it is. But that's because there's some kind of order to all of this chaos, to all of this, all of these energy fields and things, that they show up just right to where it looks like there's real stuff.
Yeah. So my inclination would be to say, no, you're crazy. However, this is where science is today.
This is physics.
This is the accepted. So we really have sort of these three different dimensions of physics. And you're making me think that we're the middle earth, which I think
We are the middle. We're in the middle. Yep. And what we experience. And so I told you when I first read this, the first book, I thought, well, this guy's crazy. This cannot be true. And then what I found out I'm also a video guy. So I've watched a lot of videos from PBS and from some University of Toronto. When I was going through this, had some videos out there about the experiments that show why we believe what we believe. And it's like, it is crazy, but it's real. It's not new age stuff. It's what you can do in a laboratory, and they can prove it. And the scientists really wrestled with each other for a long time. And then they finally just came to accept, we don't know how this could be true, but it is true.
Yeah.
So that started to open up the Bible for me, because there was a bunch of things. I believe that this predestination thing, that seems like there's senses of it when you read the Bible. But there's also this free will and choice. It's like, well, that they can't both be true. Well, from a science standpoint, there's things just as crazy and crazier, both opposites, and yet they're true. So that started to just really open up all kinds of doors for me. And that wasn't the only thing that led me to Christ. There are other things going on personally, but those doors being opened was really important. And so this was, I can't remember. So I'm 60. So this is 26 years ago. And since more and more and more of this is coming out, it's so easy to find information now on the evidence for a creator. It's overwhelming. And I'm proud of this book, and Ron, your fingerprints are all over this book. But I also, there's several books out there that I just highly recommend that are so good. There's so many good books right now that show the evidence for a creator.
So we'll come back to this again at the end, but because there's so many good books out there, I'm wondering if somebody sent you an email, would you recommend some books for them?
I would, absolutely.
Yeah.
And my email is, so the email that's in the book is faithandphysics@gmail.com. And so that's all spelled out. It's not an ampersand, it's faith, A-N-D, physics, all spelled properly, @gmail.com. I'd love to hear from people, and I'd love to tell you a book maybe I'd even recommend before my own. but I'm also very proud of my own. So
yeah, great.
And websites also. There's websites out there that daily. One of them, they give daily physics reasons to believe, because there's so much coming in right now that says, yep, that only could have happened when it was done by design, not just happenstance.
So I want to get to how you think Jesus fits in with this in a moment. But before we go there, in my work, again, as a non-scientist, I've come to believe that, and I think you influenced my thinking with this, that you have these theoretical scientists, or we could say theoretical physics, which is really trying to understand the order of something, but at a conceptual level. And then you have experimental scientists who are actually taking this theory and trying to prove or disprove it through a series of experiments. And then you have applied scientists or applied physicists who are saying, not how do we make this practical in our world? How do we actually generate or create value as a result of this in our world? And one of the things that you've talked about that has stretched my thinking is that we're maybe 3 or 4 dimensions in our experience, but that there are probably more dimensions than that according to theoretical physics. So talk to us a little bit about that.
So our three dimensions, up and down is one dimension, and then left and right's another dimension, and then fore and aft is another dimension. So this room I'm in, the room you're in, is all three-dimensional. But it also happens over time. What's going on in this room over time might change. And so that's a fourth dimension, is time. And so that's nothing weird about that. Anybody who has any kind of scientific mind at all, or some math, yeah, I'm very familiar with that. And you can manipulate three-dimensional and four-dimensional equations to define what's going to happen with a cannonball when we shoot it, and what's going to happen with this race car if we put this much horsepower into the wheels going around this curve, and we can define that four-dimensionally with mathematics. And so the math that describes how a microwave works, or how a laser works, or how computers work, or how nuclear physics works, so nuclear energy and stuff like that, they couldn't capture it with four dimensions. They were able to, because there's some people that are theoretical mathematicians, basically, that the math would speak to them, and they go, well, we could do this. And well, they ended up using 10 and sometimes 11 dimensional mathematics to describe these things, and it works. And so those mathematicians came up with that, and then they would go experiment with this math. So can we find this? Then yes, we did. And then the engineers, or the application scientists, if you will, would take it and create a microwave or create lasers, or it's like, wow. Or sometimes it went the other direction. They discovered this thing, and then the math that ended up describing it had to be 10 dimensions. Well, what are these extra dimensions? And so that in itself is really crazy and fascinating. And what does that all mean? I remember when I was reading, it's like, are some of these spiritual dimensions? Or maybe there's spiritual dimensions that go beyond the 10 or 11. And when you talk about 11, that would mean there's two dimensions of time. In the 10, there's only one dimension of time. And you can think of time, going like this. But in the 11 dimensions, if you have a second dimension of time, that means there's another dimension going up. And so for every instant here, there's an infinite amount of instances here. So God, I remember one author saying, so for in what we experience is just time here, but for every instant, God has an infinite amount of time. And that even gets weird. Maybe we'll talk about time more in a bit. But so what was your question?
Yeah. Well, it's this whole idea of these dimensions beyond what we understand. And part of what you began to talk about in one of the presentations I heard you give is how Jesus maybe is an expression to us to help us see beyond the four dimensions.
So one author, and this is all theory, this is all thought experiments, but sometimes they're very helpful to help you gain some wisdom about what's going on. So one author's thought experiment was, what if there was a plane that it was just two-dimensional, and creatures lived in this two-dimensional world called flat world. And if I then intersected that plane as a three-dimensional being, what would they experience? Well, my finger, they would just experience a circle coming through, and then all of a sudden a bigger circle, and it'd be this huge mystery to them that there is such a thing as they don't even know what three-dimensional means. And it would just scare them as this three-dimensional being might intersect their two-dimensional world. And so the question he would ask, and when I teach this class, I'll ask, so how might I, as a three-dimensional being, try to communicate with them without just scaring them? And the idea is, well, maybe I could create a two-dimensional version of me, go into their world, and do the best I could to try to describe what a three-dimensional world is like, and what. And so this author was arguing, and I like this a lot. This is my wife's favorite part of the faith and physics that I teach, that God created a facsimile of himself in four-dimensional time plus the three dimensions, even though Jesus, the Word, the great I am, understands it all, said, I will limit myself and go into 3 dimensions plus time, and I will go into their world, and I'll do the best I can to describe what this greater reality really is like. And at times I'll sound crazy because they can't understand the infinite when they're so finite and stuck, kind of stuck in 4 dimensions. And yet Jesus is trying to free us from thinking that is the reality to no, there's this greater reality. And I'm offering it to you, an abundant reality. But you have to kind of start to let go of, you have to live in the world, but don't think that is the ultimate. Don't live of the world. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So Paul, writing in Colossians, says that he is the visible expression of an invisible God. So really interesting. He tells us that, first of all, God is beyond our capacity to grasp in his totality. He's invisible to us. Doesn't mean he's not present, but he's invisible to us, and that Jesus was the visible expression of that. So I think that correlates really well with what you're saying. And when you think about it, especially the religious leaders of his time rejected him exactly because that's what he was saying. He was saying, I am God in your presence. I am God manifest. And so he was accused and in their minds found guilty of blasphemy because he was equating himself with the creator of all. So I know I've often heard people say this, and it didn't really strike me as significant as when I listened to you, that when you think about who Jesus is as a historical character, you really only have 2 choices. Either he was who he said he was, which is what we've been talking about, or he was crazy.
Yeah.
And so when you keep saying this stuff is crazy, that's really the same kind of challenge, even though we didn't have science at the level that we had when he was walking the earth. It's the exact same question. It's the exact same challenge that they had to wrestle with at that time.
And so another opposites that we continue to still have to wrestle with. There's so many opposites that are both true at the same time in the Bible and also in physics. And we haven't gotten into those yet. Maybe we will. But hey, I get into it in here. There's some things that are opposite that can't be true. Well, it is true. But I'm told that Jesus was 100% God, divine, and 100% human. It's like, well, how can you be both? I don't know. And I used to have a mind that said it has to be one or the other, or 50-50 or something. But the physics has taught me, it's like, no, there can be an atom can be 100% present as a physical thing. And it can also be 100% just energy and a wave and stuff like that. It's like, well, it can't be both. Well, somehow it is.
Yeah. And you talk about, or you write about this a lot in your book from the standpoint of experiments that have been done, especially around light. And in the book, you refer to light as a very interesting and powerful metaphor for God. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's 5 aspects of light, if not a 6th, that mimic or are a parallel. I'm not sure what you want to say, but characteristics of God and characteristics of light. Look at that. There's a lot of overlap. Now, I'm not saying that light is God, though who knows? I mean, there's a lot of mystery, but light at least reflects God and mimics God. So I'm not going to go through all 5, but I'll share one with you. So Einstein, and this was one of the times when I'm going, how did he ever come up with this? But I think he spoke math, unlike and I'm an engineer. I know math pretty well, but I think math spoke to him and some other things, maybe the Holy Spirit also. But he came up with this belief that anything that traveled close to the speed of light, which is incredibly fast, I think it's 183,000 miles every second. Maybe it's 186. Every second, 186,000 miles. Anything that could come close to traveling that fast time would slow down. And so it's like, well, what do you mean? That means if you have two twins, one gets on a super fast flying machine for 40 years, and she would come back only 4 years older, and yet you're 40 years older, because time is different depending on how fast you're going. Well, he also and that's pretty much been proven with experimentation. And I don't know that they're applying that yet. We're trying to figure out how we could apply that.
Yeah, because the implications of that would be time travel.
Exactly. And so there are people trying to work on that, but they have, through experiments, said, yep, sure looks like his theory was right. But also his theory said, if you could travel the speed of light, which by an amazing coincidence, light does. Okay, so there's my bad sense of humor that you didn't get from our parents, but I did. So that anything that can travel the speed of light, time stops. Time has no meaning. There is no such thing as time. So when light comes to me from a galaxy that's a billion light years away, because that's how big these things are. It took 1 billion years, as I look at it, because I'm not traveling the speed of light. It took 1 billion years to get to my eye. Not a second ticked off, because time has no meaning to light. It's like,
and this is why we can look back and explore the creation at its beginning, because of the fact that time is not a factor in what we're studying.
Well, if I'm understanding you, I go, no. We can see creation because for us, there is time.
Yeah.
But for that light, there's no time. And this is one of the things about God in the Bible. It's like, well, how can there not be time for God, the Alpha and the Omega? And that I think there's several places in the Bible that either say it or insinuate that time, God is not constrained by time. Yeah. Time is our constraint. And so, yes, from the photon of light that came from early creation, way back, there is no time. But for us watching it, it's like, no, that's why we can see back, almost 14 billion years, sort of, kind of,
yes,
to the cosmic radiation that happened after the Big Bang and things like that. So
this is one of the 5.
So that's one. That's just one of 5 things.
Are you going to give us another one, or do they have to get the book to get all 5?
You know what? They get kind of deep. So I think it's probably better. Yeah. It's not that I'm trying to get you to buy the book. Send me an email, and if you want to have a conversation, I'll try to explain the other 5 to you. But it's in the book also.
Well, I am trying to sell the book because
okay,
I think
all right.
Yeah. And not only is it filled with wonderful stories, but beautiful pictures through the book as well. It's very well done, all in 4 color. So before we wrap things up, I mentioned earlier that what you came to was the conclusion that you had 2 choices facing you, and you could make one or the other. Talk to us a little bit about that and how that relates to quantum.
Yeah. So when you're looking at photons of light, which is the smallest chunk of light, almost like a particle of light, even though it doesn't have any mass, it acts really weird. And also an electron, which electrons, if any of you are watching this and you know chemistry a little bit, electrons determine all chemistry, and chemistry determines all things. Are they hard, or what do they look like, what do they feel like? That's all chemistry. That's all determined by electrons. And so photons and electrons both do this. And that is when we watch them, when we look at what they're doing in an experiment, which is really hard because they're so tiny. And so maybe we're bombarding them with something, but when we can know what they're doing, they act like they're a particle, like they're a little BB, a particle that can't be split up. But when we don't watch, they leave evidence later on that they were not acting like a particle, they're acting like a wave. And a wave, I like to talk about if you've ever been part of a wave in a big sports stadium, and someone started the wave, it's cool to watch it, to see it also on TV or something. But if you've ever been in it, you realize, oh, I'm part of this by standing up and down. But I like to ask people, so what is it that's moving around? I mean, I'm standing up and down, there are particles moving, but they're not moving around. So what is that you're watching? And Ron, you have an answer for this, I'm sure, because I'm sure I've asked you, but I don't want to put you on the spot. But what would you describe? What is it you're watching go around the stadium?
I would say that you're watching the relationship or the energy between those individuals.
Yeah, there's an organization of energy. There's a synchronicity of energy, and it creates a thing, sort of, kind of, that you see.
This does not actually matter, but it's observable.
It's observable energy bursts that are structured. And there are a lot of scientists going, this is what we think reality is, that there is no such thing as particles. There is no such thing as matter. Einstein's equation that kind of led to this, that light, time has no meaning for light, is E equals mc squared. We all know that. Virtually none of us understand it. There's a few understand it a little bit, but basically saying that energy equals mass or matter times the speed of light squared. And so somehow matter and energy are one and the same. And that in nuclear reactions, you can turn matter into energy, and you can turn energy into matter. I don't know if we can do that, but we certainly turn matter into energy. And so that it's looking like maybe there is no matter. There's just this facade, this illusion of matter, because like watching a wave go around a stadium, it's like, oh, I see that thing. It's like, but there's no thing there. That's what maybe classical physics, Newtonian physics, our world that we can touch and feel. It's just a bunch of structured energy, not things, not matter. Yeah. And so now again, I get so into this stuff, I forget your original question.
Which is you were confronted with two choices ultimately.
Yeah, so I got to a point where, as I studied this further and further, it's like, wow, it looks like, because what I observe creates a reality. If I observe the electron, it collapses into a reality. If I don't observe it, it stays what some would call like a ghostly wave. And then when we look at it, it becomes a particle, and such that Einstein has this quote of going, this stuff can't be true. This can't be true because I just believe the moon is there, whether I'm looking at it or not. And I think he was partly being facetious, but partly he was like, I'm really disturbed by this. So I had gotten, after 4 or 5 years of studying this, going, wow, it looks like either we create our own reality by what we observe, and I would then add by what we believe, because when you believe something, it can become at least your reality. And we could go deeper into that, but that's not a physics thing. That's more a psychology thing. So I don't know. It just seems to me that either I'm creating my reality, or there is a creator that's observing all this and is controlling all this, that we aren't observing reality into. The creator is observing everything into this stuff we see that seems so real, that it's being done not only as a one-time creation, but continually. The great I am is holding everything together. And so my favorite verse is Colossians 1:17, and that is, he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And I believe that everything in the universe is being held together every moment by the great I am, by Jesus and the Father and the Holy Spirit. And so that was the two options, was, do I create my own reality, or is there God? And then I said, let's say I do create my own. Would I choose this belief that Jesus is real? And it's like, it's a pretty good, I admire my brother's life and other real Christians that really believe this. Unfortunately, there's many of us Christians that don't live it that well, and a lot of stones can be thrown at us. But it's like, I think I really would like that life. And so for probably a year, I was in this academic exercise of, well, is it this and I'll create it, or is it really real? And finally I said, this is stupid. I believe it. I either want to believe it and it'll become true, or I believe it. And actually I swung over to it. I just really believe that God is true. God is real. And there's a whole different life available to me. And after I pass, after the the illusion of this temporary tent or whatever Paul calls us, right? We've got this temporary house, but then the real deal is going to be available to my awareness, and it'll be so beyond anything I'm able to understand right now while I'm in this temporary condition.
Yeah, you really stir in me and make me think of F. Scott Peck's poem, The Road Less Taken, which one time I could have quoted it to you, but at my age, I can't quote it anymore. But essentially, he said, I came to a fork and I made a decision to go this way. It was the road less taken. It wasn't the easy road or the road more trodden. And at the end, he says, and this has made all the difference.
Yeah.
What a powerful, powerful statement.
Amen.
You came to this fork in the road and you made this choice. And this has made all the difference. And I know from our conversations that it had to be something that was intellectually satisfying for you, but it went beyond that. It had to be something that went deeper and was more heartfelt or recognized.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you writing the book. I actually, after hearing you speak and reading the book, I went and rewrote the Lord's Prayer. And I can't say that it's the physicist's version of the Lord's Prayer because I'm not a physicist, but it's the brother of the physicist's Lord's Prayer.
And can you read that? Do you have access to it right now? I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I do. Let me pull it up because
and I'd love others to hear it too.
I just read it again this morning, so I'll pull it up real quick here.
And partly, while you're looking for it, this is partly because if they're thinking I'm crazy, and they might be right now, it's like, well, Ron's brother is crazy. I want them to also think you're crazy. So
this is our last thing, and then we'll sign off. Actually, what I discovered in rewriting it is that there's 7 distinct ideas in the Lord's Prayer for us to meditate on or to reflect on. So rather than just reciting through it and getting it done with, it's each of those, read it or pray it and think about it. So the first one is, my Father, the creator of all, your name is to be revered and you're to be recognized for who you are. That's our Father who art in heaven, but it's
Amen.
hallowed be thy name. But let's pause and think about who it is we have an opportunity to ponder and to relate to. Second, I willingly ask for your leadership, that your will be done in my life, just as you intended, both in time and space, as well as in eternity. It's this idea that through this relationship, we can transcend the things that we can sense or recognize with our limited capabilities. Next, I look to you for all that I need one day at a time. Give us this day our daily bread. This has been very meaningful to me because I've recognized the closest that we get to eternity is by focusing on today. That's the greatest opportunity that we have to experience it in this life.
Yeah, in this,
when I think about
very moment
here,
of
I think about next, because you've forgiven me of such grievous thoughts and actions against you, I won't hold others' thoughts or actions against them or insist on payback because of their selfishness, even when they've hurt me or those I love. This is a choice to forgive, but the reason that I have the strength to do that is in recognizing what I've been forgiven. And then next, only you can keep me from going astray. It's very important for me to reflect on that every day. It's not within my power to stay the course. Only you can keep me from going astray. And then please protect me from every evil scheme against me, especially those designed by the one who presumed that he could rebel against your total ownership of all creation. The big challenge that we have in a spiritual battle is this challenge of thinking that we can live outside of God, that we can get outside of what you referred to earlier, he who holds all things together. And then please, and then finally, help me always see that everything is yours, that you've created it out of your unlimited power and greatness. And it's impossible for anyone or anything to compete with your magnificence or your intentions for all that you've created. Amen. It's to finish this prayer recognizing that really all things are held together by him, including me. And when I remind myself of that, it makes all the difference.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really meaningful.
Well, you're the one who inspired it and your book. And so again, I so much appreciate the investment that you made into it. And I hope that people will think about getting it, not just for themselves, but getting it as a gift to help stimulate other people's thinking about this big question of why does the world exist? Why do we exist?
Yeah.
And how do we make sense of it all in a way that enriches our lives? So thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for doing this. And I'll just say to anybody that might watch this, if you do want to ask questions, or if you read the book, buy the book, and if you want to ask about page 72 or whatever it might be, I'd be very happy to talk with you or communicate with you through email or whatever. So faithandphysics@gmail.com would be the way to get in touch with me. So,
and again, people can get the book at Amazon.com, either in Kindle or in paperback or hardcover. I love the hardcover version. Or they could go to their local bookstore and order it if it's not in the bookstore already, and they can get it and you can pick it up later. So you can support whatever kind of business you'd like in getting it. And if they want to buy a volume, let's say that they want to get 20 copies and give them away to friends or colleagues, would they come to you, or would they still go to Amazon or their bookstore?
So I'm not smart enough around that yet, Ron. You might have a better idea, but I would ask our publisher, is there some best way to do that? So
yeah, so they could go to alohapublishing.com.
yes,
and they would give them probably the best way to get quantities.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you, Rodger. It's really a joy to spend the time with you and have such a wonderful conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Ron. Hey, there's one last thing I think I want to add, that when you say someone might want 20, it's so easy these days to gather, that if there's someone in a small group or something like that that would like to have not only the book, but an hour or two virtually with a group, I'd be very happy to do that as well. I've taught this class that led to this book virtually several times, and I think it goes very well. So
Wonderful.
if people are interested in that too, I want that, leave that door open. So
yeah, and in today's virtual world, it's so easy to do that. So
it is.
yeah, that's great. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, God.